I love these stories. Been listening for about a few weeks now on YouTube. I'm gonna share this story of mine that's not much of a horror story compared to most of these here, but I'm fairly new to D&D, been playing for at least a couple months now. Weird preference of mine is I just like doing one-shots. I've been a little nervous to join an ongoing story. So this one time I found a nice looking one-shot. I'm a sci-fi nerd, and this was a sci-fi one-shot. So of course I joined the Discord, read it over, and decided I'd join the session. DM at first seemed cool. He gave us all a few days to get our characters ready. He asked for just minimal backstory. Then when the day came, we were supposed to get the show on the road. We were all in voice chat, talking, getting to know each other, and DM asks us what was the best long-term story we've been a part of. This, surprisingly, was where the trouble started. I told him that I've only done a bunch of one-shots, no long-term stories yet. This, for some reason, was a problem with him. He told me that I'm not allowed to be a part of his games unless I have proper experience with actual D&D, and that I needed to leave otherwise. I asked how being part of a long-term story was considered proper experience, and he went on a rambling about how long-term stories are what D&D is actually for, not a bunch of crummy one-shots. We ended up arguing about my preference for a good 15 minutes. Then I probably pettily replied after, "You know you're running one of these crummy one-shots, right?" Then silence fell into the voice chat for a second. Then he kicked and banned me from the server. This so far is the only bad experience with D&D I've had, thankfully. I've went on and played a lot of good games since then. I was going to have a quippy line, but this top comment just took it from me. So thank you, Maddie J. Pitlith, for reading my mind. This is the D&D equivalent of an entry-level job that requires 4 years experience and a master's degree. So fucking true. Anyway, I'm going to write this down in my big book of weirdest ways to gatekeep Dungeons & Dragons. My name is Jacob Crowe, and welcome to the Crow's Perch, where I willingly dive into pools of waste to pick out the occasional wacky RPG horror story on Reddit so I can make enough money for birdseed this week. It ain't much, but it's honest work. But honesty is not the focus of this week's story, as a dishonest dungeon master goes out of his way to trick a group of players into thinking his game is noob-friendly, before tossing them into a hellish pit of despair, filled with enough bullshit traps to make the Tomb of Horrors start to blush. And so, without further ado, let's gather up a murder and dive right into this story. This is a story that's been with me for some time now, but I've been unsure on how exactly to fit in all the finer details without it being far too long and drawn out for anyone to care enough to read. Well, it's a good thing we're listening to it instead. For this, I'll be attempting to skip over the more frivolous details. A friend introduces myself and 2 others to their DM boyfriend, in an effort to get us to agree to an online campaign to pass the time while we're going through a dry spell of things to do. We usually play on a voiced RP server for a game that really has no business being used as a fantasy RP stand-in, but we make do with it anyways. The first meeting goes well enough. The DM is friendly, affable, if not a little self-assured with his own talents, assuring us that we're in good hands, and that he's been DMing for well over 10 years now, and that whatever we get ourselves into will be fun for the lot of us. We all put forward that we're extremely new to D&D as a whole, and that we do not know most of the systems at play. Classes, races, combat, it was all new to many of us, and as such, we wanted a light-hearted, low-risk affair with an upbeat theme overall as we got our bearings. For all intents and purposes, he seemed to agree with us entirely. All warm tones, reassurances, and pep talks. He tells us that the experience for the players is important to him, and that he wants us to make sure to fill out our characters' backstories because they're all important to him and the plot. This was a bold-faced lie. As such, we made our characters. We had Ranger, Monk, Druid, DM's girlfriend, and myself, who wanted to play a variant human. Very original, I know, but had no idea what class to play. I had art picked out for the character already, and had already set up the bulk of their backstory. The DM reads it and quickly asserts that he had the perfect beginner class for me, Artificer. Ah yes, what better class to give to your starting players than a fucking spellcaster? Don't worry, Jimmy, this game is really easy. Oh, but just one teensy little thing before we get started. Can you pick like 2 out of these 20 different spells and cantrips? Also, some of them are really good and strong, and some of them are horrible and you should never pick them. But you really don't know which ones are the good ones unless you try them, but you also might die, but lol. Skill issue, am I right? Jimmy, are you okay? You look like you're sweating over there. Look, point is, don't make your first time players play a caster unless they know what they're getting into. That being said, let's get back to the story. I read it over and couldn't make heads or tails of it. It seemed complicated and quite weak to start with. He assured me it was ideal for the campaign he had in mind. So I took his word on it and locked in as Artificer, even though I still felt uneasy at his insistence to play a class that seemed both complicated and fragile. I even mentioned that I was willing to play a Cleric or Mercy Monk if it meant giving us some healing options, since we didn't have any healing available to us in our team composition. The DM assured me that it wasn't going to be necessary at all, that we'd have a surplus of potions, and that damage wouldn't be that heavy against us. If only I knew the extent of how bad it was all going to get. Our beginner-friendly module was Rime of the Frost Maiden. Everything was dark, meaning that everyone without dark vision was at disadvantage almost all of the time. We were constantly under strain and taking exhaustion points due to the weather, with no workaround. And everyone, and I mean everyone, hated us, because we were outsiders that weren't going to make a difference. Everyone except the DM's girlfriend, Druid, who, upon later admission, was intimately familiar with the module. She rolled a Goliath that was also a werebear, a strong boon to have, a native to Icewind Dale at that, so everyone was sugary sweet to her. The game only lasted until Session 3, before everything fell apart. Session 1 had us delving into a Dwergar outpost to retrieve our stolen items. They were thoroughly bunkered down, and every fight involved us attacking enemies behind cover, before we got closer, and ended up getting multi-attacked for almost all of our hit points. We had no healer, so most of this endeavor was spent in and out of making death saves. The poop award goes to when the Dwergar captain, whose head was locked in the jaws of a werebear and taking massive amounts of damage, decided to turn a full 180. I imagine his neck did a lovely little snapping sound when he did so, and multi-attacking my character, who was right behind him. Because it totally makes more sense to attack the Artificer, dealing 6 damage to you per turn, rather than the werebear munching your head for 18 to 25 damage per turn. Yes, I was a little salty about that due to it making no narrative sense in my eyes, but I tried to shrug it off, and presume I was just being a little sour due to inexperience with the game itself. When we finished clearing out the outpost, we essentially got a, thanks I guess, from the townsfolk. That's it. No reward. Save for a free night at the inn as apology for getting us robbed under their roof. I tried to shrug off the bad feeling left on me by how grim things had been. I figured things were going to pep up as soon as we continued to have successes in our journey. Session 2 was mostly harmless at first, outside of a weird encounter in the next town we visited, with a barkeep described to be beautiful and making bedroom eyes at my character, of which he did not reciprocate, much to the evident disappointment and even glum responses from the DM. Things were fine until we received and undertook our next mission. We attempted to stock up on potions, only to get informed that supplies were zilch, due to the never-ending blizzard, and any potions already brewed were going to be substantially marked up by several times their market value. That was, if the shopkeepers even wanted to sell to us outsiders. We pretty much had to have Druid hold our hand with every interaction with anyone, It's at this point that Monk and I begin DMing each other, acknowledging that the Dungeon Master's been being inconsistent with his promises. From here, her and I are pretty much observing things under a very critical lens. On to the quest. We ended up scaling a mountain, almost got trounced by an avalanche. My character was the only one caught in it, and if it wasn't for the party coming back down to dig me up, my artificer would have died right then and there. Made our way further up, and eventually encountered one of the people we were looking for. He tells us that his caravan was assaulted by Yeti, and they dragged off his companions into one of their caves. We follow him and attempt the rescue, finding all but one of his companions quite gruesomely deceased. The DM made sure to be extremely descriptive of the carnage and disrespect done to their corpses. Nasty stuff. The fight gets underway, starting with one Yeti before the entrance is blocked off by another, keeping us trapped inside for the duration of the fight. My character hangs way back and off to the side to keep safe, firing spells from afar for admittedly negligible damage. This is when both Yeti decide to barrel through the party members, fighting them to begin attacking my artificer, taking opportunity attacks just to do so. You know, for some reason. At this point, it wasn't so much a red flag situation as it was wrapping me up in a red tarp and beating me on the head with the dummy stick. I spend the fight paralyzed by chilling gaze, with unquestionably high saving throws and nearly in critical condition. Thankfully, the party handles it. I'm annoyed. But we carry on with the roleplay and eventually head down the mountain with our escort targets in tow. It was there we encounter a most curious sight. A tribe of satyr-like folk begin to pass their way along the base of the mountain in what appeared to be some sort of pilgrimage. They're described as tough, enduring but cautious people. They stare at us long and hard, as though we're potential threats to be dealt with, before the leader, a young but grizzled man, approaches us, waving down his men from being so standoffish. It was around this time that the DM's girlfriend began to get giddy. We're greeted, asked of what we're doing here. We explain, but are apprehensive, as everyone in Icewind Dale has been very standoffish at best and threatening at worst. The leader nods before wishing us luck on our journey and departing. This is important. You'll see why in the finale of Session 3. We return to town, got our modest pay, not enough for even one potion, and settle for the night, after receiving another quest to investigate a mine near to the town that has stopped sending in reports. We rest for the day, end session, and reconvene in the next few days. This is where everything goes to hell real quick. We get to the mine. It's dark, like very dark. Minimal encounters, save for some giant rats. No signs of the miners themselves. We clear the floor until we get to the end that leads to the lower levels. A wooden walkway that leads to a hole in the opposite side of a wide, deep chasm. My artificer, being the resourceful sort that he is, makes a makeshift harness out of his brand new rope and holds the rope out to the party to hold on to it. His plan: I'm going to test the integrity of the walkway. If it starts to crumble, do not let me fall, okay? He steps onto the walkway cautiously. No squeaking, no give, nothing. I roll perception. Investigation. You sense nothing is wrong. I step more in. Repeat the same cycle. You sense nothing is wrong. This continues for 2 more cycles, until my character is on the middle of the platform, when suddenly, shoo, the platform just detaches from the wall? 3 saving throws have to be made. Constitution so I don't break my back when the rope gets taut, and 2 saves on the monk's side to ensure she keeps grip and footing, and another to successfully pull me up. We thankfully succeed. The Dungeon Master sounds pissed. Full-on exasperated sigh, before acknowledging that I was successfully pulled up. I'm stunned. Monk is messaging me up a storm, wondering how the hell that just happened. I ask as politely as I can manage, was there any way that we could have succeeded in detecting that trap or structural failure at all? He replies gruffly, no. Kobolds are master trap makers. You never would have been able to tell. Be thankful I let you guys make saves. That was supposed to be an instant death trap. The chasm leads straight into the Underdark. At this point, I had resigned that this is going to be my last session with this DM. Monk was already on board, but we wanted to see this last session through because of Ranger and Druid. Ranger, who hasn't commented on any of this, and Druid, who seemed to be more than content with the nature of how this was all going. With some wild shape antics, we end up riding Druid in giant spider form to the hole in the wall. They skitter to the bottom level, while we work the elevator within said hole in wall, which really was more of a big bucket and a rope. Before we do anything, we check the integrity of the rope. It's in immaculate condition as far as you can tell. So down goes Ranger. Everything's fine. Down goes Monk. Everything's fine. This bucket descends about 200 feet, mind you. Quite the ways down if anything bad happens. Now's my turn. I check it again. It's fine, the DM snaps. I get in the bucket and start to descend. And before we begin going down, I say, my character is prepared to grab for the rope if anything happens. No reply from DM. Around the 50-foot marker. Due to the heaving weight of your character, the rope snaps. I ask to roll a dex save to grab the rope. I roll a 21. DM grunts before saying, you narrowly succeed, but can now only go up. What do you do? Well, clearly I go up. When my character reaches the top, he leans against the nearby wall, clearly winded from the ordeal. The vertical wall. This is important. The bucket hits the ground, causing a sound throughout the cavern. There is silence that follows. Monk and Ranger stealth up. They fudge their rolls, but this doesn't matter. In floats a big Mama Grell. It's in the room Monk and Ranger are in, and doesn't acknowledge them. Instead, it notices the bucket. Pieces together that the bucket being on the floor and off the rope means trouble above, somehow. It floats up and attacks my character, who is at disadvantage according to the DM because he's prone. Excuse me, what? I blurt out. When the hell did I get knocked prone? When you leaned against the wall? I have never in all my years heard of leaning against the vertical wall as laying full prone, I retort. My game, my rules. You're acting like a child, and I am not your babysitter. Get over it. It was at that time that things came to a head, and Monk and I began to let out our grievances. How this was anything but what we were promised, that this entire campaign felt set up to be a TPK against us, in which he began to show his true colors in full. The DM went on a full ego trip, saying that he isn't beholden to the whims of immature crybabies sobbing over losing their favorite toys, that it's not the Dungeon Master's job to appease the players, that he would never cheapen the experience of the official modules by altering them in any way, and that D&D just wasn't for us. We began to point out his inconsistencies, which he had little answers for, save for one. When we mentioned the lack of healer, and how we were presented no option to remedy this issue, he asserted that we were supposed to recruit the Satyr tribe leader NPC, as it was his old D&D campaign character and he was a cleric. How are we supposed to know that? Monk replied. There were no hooks given, and he was leading a nomadic tribe. Definitely a far cry from an adventurer looking for a party to go gallivanting off with. He simply deflects, and goes on to say, I was teaching you all a lesson, but you're clearly all too immature to get it. You're not supposed to get attached to your characters. Characters die all the time in D&D. You're supposed to expect it and always have a spare sheet ready. Your characters aren't special. None of them are. And neither are any of you. At that point, I'd left, as did Monk. They tried to continue the campaign with a new player for one session, in which they had killed off our characters in extremely disrespectful ways. The new player's barbarian ended up skinning our monk for a fur cloak against the cold. They were a shifter. They pretty much skinned a slightly fuzzier humanoid. Gross. For humor's sake, we ended up researching the module to see just how loyal to script the DM was being. And let me tell you, he had altered a lot. More enemies, more health, and far higher damage output. Bad things would happen that had save/checks that were not implemented in any capacity, forcing us to fail. He had essentially made the campaign harder for some reason. Maybe to force that lesson onto us. Regardless, I had almost quit D&D for good after that. As much as I felt done dirty by the guy, his words stuck with me, and I kept kicking myself, wondering if I was the bad guy, for getting so irate at the end. Thankfully, I was pulled out of that line of thinking by good friends, who introduced me to new DMs. I've been an avid TTRPG player for well over a year now, and I've had great times all around. While he does make a point that characters can die, and TPKs do in fact happen, Session 0 is important, and being honest with your party, hearing their wants and needs, is crucial for the enjoyment of everyone at the table, DM included. Moral of the story, honesty is key, as is communication as a whole. There is absolutely a time and place for a hopeless and grimdark campaign. That in and of itself can be fun, but only if that is what you and your party are mutually looking for. Treat each other and yourselves well. You'll thank each other for it as you weave wonderful stories together. To user the Cynical Sorcerer, thank you for your story, and I'm glad to see that you moved on to better games. One thing I'd like to add though, is that what this DM portrayed is not at all what some sort of old school style death is around every corner game is even supposed to be like. You even played in accordance to that philosophy. You and your group went out of your way to use your heads instead of your sheet, and then he punished you for it. That is the exact opposite of this style of play. But back to the game itself. Yeah, this clearly isn't the campaign you signed up for. Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frost Maiden already has some questionable practices when it comes to its difficulty. That adventure, much like this DM, seems to want to have its cake and eat it too, when it comes to deciding whether or not they want to make old school unfair encounters or traditional balanced ones. And in the case for both this DM and the adventure he ran, instead of doing either, they just ended up making a complete mess. Get out! Get out! The biggest offender of this DM's game design are the traps. These trap designs especially are why players despise traps. I remember reading a blog post on Bastionland, written by Chris McDowell, discussing various traps and what he considers to be good ones. And something he mentions about how to make a good trap in one of his blogs talks about his 3 main rules when making a trap, by making it visible, making it interactable, and making it have impactful consequences. In my opinion, if it doesn't do any of these things, then why the hell did you make it in the first place? And what does it actually add to the game, other than just being a time/fun-consuming roadblock? I'm gonna leave a link on a pinned comment on this video to direct to a few short posts about traps on his blog Bastionland. because I think there's some cool stuff in there that you should read if you like cool things. But to conclude this DM was ineffectual, an insecure, projecting bully, and he wanted so badly to just kill his players that he didn't even allow ways for the players to circumvent the fate he had assigned to them. Unless they just happened to roll good, I guess. Just toss the whole mans into DM bootcamp to start from scratch, because he clearly needs a reality check, as he knows not what the flock he is doing in his games. But these were today's stories, and those were my thoughts. And if you enjoyed today's stories, then please consider subscribing to the channel and leaving a like on this video. Made it this far? Why not leave a comment? And if you can't think of a comment, then leave the comment "Power Trip," so that I know you made it to the end of today's video. And if you want to support the channel even further, then please consider hitting the join button or signing up on the Patreon so that you can support me directly and get special roles on my Discord, as well as getting early access to videos a day early, so that you can be among patrons like our counts of quills, like Aaron Kados, Sharkay, Critical Kunik, Evix, King Drazil, Christian Pip, Cosmosis, Rikus, Vincent, Haley Thompson, Zero Fang, and Netscape Navigator. You know, you can be an even cooler bird if you join up with the Barons of Beaks, like Brittney Mars, Rimgrim, Raytheana the Nerd, Sarah Warren, Spectre Spark, Ars Tarak, Ghost Legan, Mr. Hypocritical, Javon Megan, Jesse Shodell, Kuntos Weasel, Moet Ismao, Techblog, Curister, Gardisbon, Jester King, Lord Rend, Wormy, Tanner the Drake, Mickey Eatley, and Anya. And in honor of the Dukes of Feathers, I shall honor them with the voice of Valdis Gaskin, which I had presented in the Season 2 of Dice Goblins, which is premiered on December the 2nd. Join the Dukes like Craykard, Hexblading, Kai-veMind, TheSchoolBus, MirageVaxus, Quinn, Blues Otters, Jared Zemlin, Doc Salty 96, Matthew MulQueeny, and Acroth. And just before we leave today, I'll leave you with this week's Art of the Week by Nano on Twitter. An absolutely beautiful scene in Shadow over Kirkonos, depicting my character Maseo and Den of the Drake's character Falrus, attempting an absolutely horrible pinky promise. Beautiful stuff, Nano. Thank you for your fan art. And I'll see you next time, as the crow flies.